Facebook family and friends. How you guys doing today? Today I have the pleasure of introducing you to two of my guests. We spoke about it earlier. We're going to be speaking with Carl Fields and Reverend Seth Raymond. Carl is the program manager at the Hospitality Center downtown, the Racine Interfaith Coalition Group, chairman and a dedicated member of EXPO. Reverend Seth Raymond is the executive director at the Hospitality Center and the priest at St. Luke's Episcopal Church. Sorry about that. Gentlemen, how are you today? Carl, Seth?
Doing well. Thanks, Monty.
Good afternoon, sir.
All right. So I ask you to please forgive me. I'm not in my office since COVID-19 situation and everything. I'm working from home. So occasionally we'll see the special guest star walking behind me. It doesn't happen often. Usually when I'm doing a broadcast, the family keeps their distance. So I'd like to thank both of you for the time to come in here and have this discussion with me. We've known about the Hospitality Center for a long time. I'm really looking forward to exploring your perspectives on some of the issues of concern around Racine right now. But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about your stories. Starting with Carl, how long have you lived in Racine, and how would you describe your path to becoming active in our community?
I grew up here. I'm from Chicago originally, grew up in Racine, been here since elementary school age. And my path to activism and being a community organizer is pretty simple. I'm an ex-knucklehead turned professional. And as a guy who has been through it and run the gauntlet, so to speak, I've seen policies and how they were shaped. I've seen how that sort of thing doesn't work for a person living that truth. And having that firsthand account, and now, being in the work and being able to display some of that and share some of that professionally in the work, it's been helpful, trying to change systems and not having a real understanding of what those systems are, how they work, or not having that voice at the table, can have an effect, a negative effect. And so I feel like as a person who's experienced it and a person who's working in these fields doing this work, it's been very fulfilling, very happy to be a part of it.
I'm glad to hear that. And Seth, how long have you been a part of the community here in Racine?
Yeah, so I've been down in Racine for almost 4 years now. I'm a priest in the Diocese of Milwaukee, which is kind of a misnomer because it's actually network of churches in the entire southern third of the state, so all the way across the state to Minnesota. And so about 4 years ago, I was looking for different positions. I was originally up in a church near Milwaukee, and I grew up in Denver, Colorado, where there's a day shelter out there run by the Episcopal Church. And so I grew up volunteering in a day shelter. I worked with adults with disabilities for many years. So people who are kind of vulnerable in a community are really close to my heart. So when the Hospitality Center position came open, I immediately jumped on it, and I think within 2 weeks of me expressing interest, I was driving down to Racine every day. So I've been in Racine since then. And then actually a year and a half after that, St. Luke's Episcopal Church had their priest retire, and so they decided they would just take the priest that was on site already and kept me around. So I'm there 6 days a week, and then the rest when I'm not there, I'm usually with my girls. So takes a lot of my time, but it's really good work.
So if you don't mind me asking, what led you to become a priest, to become a reverend?
Yeah, so a lot of it is those experiences growing up in the church, but really being connected in a church that's really active socially. I did a lot of reading actually in college and seminary around liberation theology. So the idea that, God is with the poor, and not only is God with the poor, that actually the poor are God's favored people. And so if we're going to be on God's side, as it were, then we have to be with the poor. And I've always loved being with people who really are living life, and struggling through life and really being really resilient in that process. And so it's kind of funny that the church is known as being kind of a white collar, upper class church. Here I am in Racine, and it fits me well.
That's great. You know, it's funny. One of my favorite things biblically is that all of Jesus's friends, all of his closest confidants, prior to becoming a part of his circle, were not really good people, right? We see that, you know, they came from a background that, you know, Paul, formerly Saul, I mean, a slayer, you know, all of his circle were people from the bottom that he helped to guide and to bring to their light, and to make them shine, right? To show their true nature, to show what we're able to do inside, if we give it that chance. That's amazing. Thank you. Carl, so you became a volunteer there at the Hospitality Center several years ago. Do you remember what made you or what inspired you to that calling?
Sure. It was pretty simple. It was the only place I could volunteer. as a guy who, you know, was fresh out of prison. I had did almost 2 decades in prison at the time. Not only was it hard to find a job, it was hard to connect in the community, period. And so this happened to be literally the one program that I could connect with. And before, you know, I'm on staff now, and I've been on staff for a couple of years. But before that, a year before I took a role there, I was a volunteer, and I was there because a friend of mine explained it to me. An established ally, as we call it, explained it to me that it was a program that, you know, she thought would be up my alley. She knew people who were in that struggling position was near and dear to my heart because of my mother dying a few years back here in Racine. I always felt like you're supposed to be taking care of people who are struggling. You're supposed to extend a hand to those people in that condition because they're still people and their humanity needs some protection, honestly. And so she said, this is down that road that you're talking about you want to be a part of in this advocacy work and in community organizing work. And you should put your time forth somewhere meaningful while you're trying to get yourself established. You should do both. And I told her, I don't know if I could do this and look for a job and struggle, you know, through the social problems that come along with, you know, having a felony on your record. She said, you'll figure it out. Go do it. I did it. It was one of the best choices I ever made. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like the saying, work without faith or faith without work. You can't have one without the other.
Right.
So how long have you and Seth been working together?
Quite a while, actually. I mean, he was probably in position of about 6 months or so, Seth, before me and him really got to talking and it became official. I had met him when he was in transition because when I was a volunteer at the shelter, I was there with the previous directors, and so I knew what the program was like. I had also previous to that, I had a role at the temporary shelter. I had a part-time job there, and so a lot of the people that Hospitality Center was, you know, inviting into the space, I had a relationship with, and so much of this work is done on and through relationships, and dignity and respect always has to be infused into such a scenario. And so I had that background. Plus, I was a trained organizer at that point, and I was looking to bring some of those tactics along with what I know about conflict resolution and all of that, which is helpful in the scenario where people come bringing their challenges with them. It worked out. Me and Seth, you know, I stayed connected to the program because I had a love for it. And when Seth took over, you know, he started talking about all these radically different things. And, you know, I want to do it this way and I want to do it that way. And before you know it, he was like, and I want you to be a part of that. What you think?
Right.
So, yeah.
All right. So for some of our viewers who aren't aware, and as you know, this being a social media platform with YouTube and everything, there's going to be people outside the Racine or the Wisconsin area who will view this at some point. So let's explain to them what the Hospitality Center is, what it does here in our community, what its mission statement is, and how it works. And
sure, Seth, I'll let you take that one.
Yeah.
All right. So for those who know Racine, you can imagine kind of where we are, but I'll describe it. We're right at the corner of 7th and Main Street, so right in downtown Racine, right at the heart there. And I always, when people come and visit, I take them outside and I ask them to look around at our building, at the building surrounding us, so they can get an idea of our context. And we are right across the street from the Racine County Jail on one side, from McMinn Towers, which is a housing complex for people with disabilities and elderly people. The Racine Public Library is right down the street. And then, of course, we have our small businesses, restaurants, and things like that surround us. And then above them are folks who live in the apartments above those restaurants. And so we are situated right there in the heart of a fairly impoverished area, but also a really unique area because it's a place where a lot of people come. They come there for the library. They come there for the restaurants. And so the Hospitality Center, since its beginning in 2011, has really had a mission to welcome all people. And I think that's what's really been something that continues to pull me, is this idea that it's the Hospitality Center is for homeless people. It's for people who have jobs. It's for people who are, on their way to work in the morning or on their way home from work in the morning if they're working third shift. It's for people who need a spiritual refuge, people who need a place to go to an AA group, people who might need a meal for whatever reason. They don't want to cook at home or don't have those skills. And so the Hospitality Center's mission really is to be that resource center, to be a place where people can come for basic needs, but then also find it to be a place where they find community and fellowship, and connection to other needs that they either didn't realize they, had, or that they kind of discover here. So that's our main core services are our food. We serve breakfast and lunch every day, 5 days a week. We have a clothing closet that gets a lot of traffic. That's free clothing each week. And then we've built up connections with a lot of other partners. So we have a monthly hair salon that the Andis Company provided. We have weekly mental health support groups that some outside people provide. Martha comes in with their nursing students and does some clinic time with us in the fall. So we're really meant to be. Our mission is really to be that place where people gather. They come there for those basic needs, and then they find those connections that we have in our community that might not be accessible readily to all people.
So I actually learned something there. I wasn't aware of all the services. So let's take for an example. I've had a hard day. I'm frustrated. I don't really have anywhere to go to sit and be calm and quiet and collect myself prior to going home. I would be welcome to come and sit and possibly talk with you or someone else, or just sit quietly for a little while before going home. That would be something I would be able to do.
Right. And one of the beautiful things about the Hospitality Center is we're located inside St. Luke's Episcopal Church. And so, the church is open the whole time. And so we have this beautiful sanctuary that people will find their way into. They can sit, they can pray, they can do whatever they would like to do in that quiet space. And then our hall there that we eat in is more of a social atmosphere. Some people think it's too loud. But it's certainly a place where, unlike a lot of places where you walk in and the atmosphere is dulled and, people are kind of sticking to themselves, that is not us. We are a place where people are connecting with one another.
So I'm originally from Los Angeles, and I love that you said there's a sanctuary there. I'm not by definition a Christian. I'm a follower of God, and I do have a strong spiritual belief. And I grew up with sanctuaries all around us in our neighborhoods, and the churches were always the safe place, the sanctuary, right? And so I love the fact that you used the word sanctuary when you had spoke about the opening area for people to find peace. And in the end, regardless of our faith, regardless of our lives, we're all seeking peace. We're all seeking sanctuary somewhere, whether it be inside or outside. And I love that you described it that way. So how would you describe how COVID has affected what you do, and how has it impacted the women, the men, and the children that do come there? I think that's something that we forget about. We don't think about in our daily struggles for life is the effects COVID-19 has had on our population as a whole. So how does that affect you guys there?
Carl, go for it.
Well, it's certainly something that has been a heavy thing to adjust to. But since COVID and since, the restrictions have, landed on all of us, we've been able to find a way to continue to feed people and provide some support to a level that is comfortable and acceptable and reasonable. We still are serving over 100 people a day. We package meals inside, and we've been handing out food at the door for some time now, to-go meals. We do a light breakfast and a decent-sized lunch still. We still are working through our systems to be able to buy clothing for people, although we have been able to provide people with emergency clothing in the situations that they come with, considering that needs still need to be met. It's been challenging in that one of the things that we provide is a space and an opportunity to have and be in community. And so that's taken a hit, that's taken a real toll. And so that's been hard to adjust to for us as well as for the guests that we invite in. But we certainly have been able to continue to check in on some people, some of the guests that come to just be with us, not homeless, not particularly struggling in an economic scenario, just have either been pushed out of public spaces or made to feel unwelcome in other public spaces, still see the hospitality center as their place. And they still come to touch base with us. They still come and be with us. But it's challenging when we're talking about the struggle of people in Racine community, particularly people of color, struggling the most with these COVID numbers. When we're talking about positive tests, when we're talking about Racine already being on the list of being one of the worst cities for a Black person to live in, and then we talk about a pandemic on top of that, it's a struggle to both get some of the people that we know to take that seriously and wear masks and take a lot of different precautions. But, we've been active and we've been progressive about that. And to all the people who have both made masks for us and continue to send us masks, blessings to you, because you keep us in a position to be able to both put a mask in someone's hand and talk to them about why this is a care package right here. This is us caring about you. And we ask that you both take part in the community buy-in, which is wearing the mask, and take part in taking care of somebody else next to you, even if you yourself don't think a mask is necessary.
I think to Carl's point, like one of the biggest changes for me, at least, is that we've become one of the places where people get their information about what's happening. The folks who normally get, time at the library during the day to get at Wi-Fi access, or come to us, they're not getting a lot of that. And so especially at the beginning, a lot of it was public health education. We're teaching people about the reality of what's happening. People are getting a lot of different stories about how COVID spreads and how it doesn't spread, or if it's actually real. All of these things. You're dealing with people with a lot of mental health issues at times. And so people at the beginning and even still are very disoriented. And so orienting people to things like the day of the week and, what season we're going into. And these are things that when people lose those touchstones of their regular routine, it can really knock them off their game. And so we check in with each of our people as they come through our line as they're picking up a lunch. Where there's a really solid network of people downtown, especially who really watch out for one another. And so we try to be that voice that says, here's what's happening. Like, let's try to orient you. Let's try to keep you safe during the time.
Absolutely. So there are a lot of misconceptions about homelessness, about mental illness, about the men and women who need assistance. What are some of the most important things you think the public needs to know about the men and women that you guys serve?
I think so. You're talking earlier about how the disciples of Jesus were the guys who were kind of the people of ill repute, right? And what I find is absolutely fascinating is that when COVID hit, our volunteer corps took a massive hit. We had about 95 active volunteers, and we're down to really like 18 to 20 really core people that stuck around. And those folks are the folks that, people might see on the street and think of them as our guests. And the reality is that the people that have like this real desire, to continue on working and to continue on volunteering and giving themselves to this work are sometimes the people who also have difficulty maintaining employment and, have other issues going on with addiction and mental health. And so one of the beautiful things about the Hospitality Center is we welcome folks from any background into our volunteer corps, as Carl talked about earlier. And so the people serving and the people making the meals right now are the people that you might see on the street and think they're the ones who are, in need of receiving a meal. And the truth is that they're one and the same. I always tell people when they come to us, like, why don't you eat? And people, say, oh, I don't want to take a meal from somebody. I'm like, that's not a thing. Like you eat, right? So that's who this is here for, is for anybody that eats. But
that's a true definition of community, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, that's a long way of answering that. But my learning point is that they're never underestimate the willingness of someone to put in the hard work to make something happen for others.
Absolutely, man. That is amazing. So, what kind of assistance do you guys need, and how can our viewers and the members of our communities help you guys? What are the things that we need to do to make the Hospitality Center stay and grow, right? Well, that's it. So we need to sustain and we need growth. What can we do as a community to help you? What can our viewers and our community members do? Carl?
Well, they certainly can, continue with getting, like you said, the education and the information about who we are and what we do and how we can continue to do that. The support that we've gotten has been great along the lines of water and meals. We take on a lot of different clothing donations. We take on people who clean out their attics and basements. We certainly also have been appreciative of people who have been willing to and able to think of us when they go to Sam's Club to do their own personal shopping. They also pick up, these cans that are called number 10 cans. They're the cans that you hold with both hands is our promotion with that. We've gotten a lot of donations around that. But the interesting thing is I feel like I'm in K-12 again, but juice cups, juice boxes, packages of peanuts, water bottles, things like that help us to continue on to make enough meals for enough people. We get all the time where we hit a top end number of meals that we've made, and families come at the end. And so we find stuff to, send them home with, because everybody eats. We try our best to stick to that. It's certainly where the transition has happened, moving out of COVID. As we begin to talk about what it looks like to open up the space, we're certainly going to need a small army of volunteers again. So those who have time and are willing to put forth some efforts to help us transition out of this and back into receiving people, we will definitely welcome them. Absolutely. And we'll receive information as well to, get in contact. But we're not hard to find. I mean, on our website, hospitality-center.org is a place that, they can take a look. The information's there. There are links to donate because sometimes people don't have time to give, but they are willing to give of other efforts. I mean, an economic effort is a solid thing too. Yeah. It buys food, it buys things that we need. And so, you can donate time, which I appreciate. You can donate your efforts. Whatever you can do helps.
Yep. And there's a link right on our front page to which Carl said. So hospitality-center.org.
Okay. And then I'll see if I can include your guys' link in our YouTube video. And that way, when future viewers watch it, they'll have that link in our YouTube video that they can click on to visit the page and make donations. In fact, I believe it's up there as we speak. My producer's pretty quick, so she's pretty amazing. But yeah, you're talking about the food. I can't imagine how different it's been since COVID hit and school is out. I know Racine was really proactive. We have an amazing teaching staff here in the Racine public school system. My good friend Angelina Cruz is the union steward for the Racine Teachers Association, and they did their best to service as many children as they could. And it even got to be to a point where they were handing out free lunches during the morning times for any families that had children between the ages of 1 and 18, right? Whether they were in school or not, they were providing food for as many as they could. But I can't imagine how many families were unable to make it there. And, you know, the idea of children going hungry, I remember being hungry as a child and not having anything to eat and having to figure that out. You know, I just got to say thank you so much for that service. You know, it's men and women who service our children that change things, you know. They give them that feeling of hope. And for sometimes, you know, that's the only meal children will eat be at school. You know, let's be realistic here. For the most part, our community, our poor community, right? Our community, Carl, growing up where we grew up, you know, our income is extremely low in comparison to the rest of the state. Families, you know, tend to have to choose between paying bills and feeding their children. And if you can't pay the bills, you don't have a place to live. So what goes first? You know, food.
Right.
So, you know, definitely we'll push and talk to those that I know about making sure we can help to donate, whether it be food items, time items, or money. So the two of you have spent several years now serving your community, and we'll take a turn with, because I'd like to hear both of your perspectives on this. What would you say are some of the most profound things that you've learned and that have surprised you in that process? And I know that's kind of a deep question, so take your time. Either one of you want to do it, but you know, we all learn something when doing service work. We all learn something when helping others, and we learn a lot about ourselves. What's something that really stands out and is profound to you that you've learned during your years of service work?
Sure, I can jump in. So my time in Racine, it's been the first time that I've been in a small city. Grew up in Denver and then lived in Milwaukee. And so Racine to me initially felt really small, and I wasn't sure kind of how to make my way. And then, I mean, so Carl's story about kind of how we connected, you know, shows a little bit. I mean, what the part he didn't tell me is, like, you know, I was looking for, you know, recommendations for who would be good in this work. And I knew that my personal qualifications were people that didn't look like me, because I knew that we serve a diverse group of people, and we needed our staff to reflect that. And so, you know, the initial people that I knew going down there were people that looked like me, and I knew I had to get out of that. And the first people that I met in Racine were people that were tied into Racine Interfaith Coalition. And so they immediately said, you know, well, you know, Carl would be a really great candidate. I didn't know even a quarter of the stuff that Carl did when I actually invited him to interview. I had no idea. But what that taught me, and what I keep learning over and over and over, is that the best way in Racine to get something done is to ask somebody who knows somebody. And it was, I mean, it's been a learning experience about, like, you know, how does Racine work? And Racine works like a small city or like a small town. And there's incredible beauty in that. I mean, you know, even the people who, you know, might be seen as, you know, somewhat, you know, like adversarial or whatever, like, if you have a conversation with that person and get to know them, I mean, all of those walls begin to start breaking down. Or if you can say, you know, somebody that they know, and you have some sort of relationship that way. And that just happens over and over and over again, in the city. You know, it's in my mind, you know, the city is an accessible place. You know, you can talk to the people who make decisions, fairly easily, and you can go out on the street and talk to people who feel like they're powerless, and the same day. And it's a beautiful thing. And so I don't know if that's present in other cities or not. It doesn't feel that way in bigger cities. But that's been something that really keeps me in Racine, because I love being able to be that connected in with what is happening, kind of having a pulse.
Carl, what's been the most profound thing you've learned since you've been doing this?
It's like, for me, like you said, as a kid, I experienced something similar. You know, for a while, my mother, myself, my siblings, we were homeless, and we were in that scenario where we had to rely on shelters and meal programs pretty heavily. And one of the things that really struck me, it was two things really. It was how as a kid I felt invisible in that situation, and how the meal was given to me or presented to me. You know, when I had those moments where it was presented to me in a way that made me feel like I was a burden for being there, and that was my only option, that really stuck with me. But when it was the opposite, that stuck too. And so, you know, part of my work that I do, and you know, as my buddy Reverend Barber would say, in repairing the breach, both within my own self and my own heart and my own experiences, as well as in the community I come from, is that I remember what I didn't like about those experiences, and I remember how disconnected they made me feel. And so part of the work is to make sure that doesn't happen, or when it does happen, that we repair well, and that we help that person to not just connect with us, but also build a bridge into the community as a whole, because our place and our space shouldn't be the only place that a person feels welcome and feels like there's an ability to genuinely be them and genuinely be able to connect. That's for the overall community to play a part in that too, because we all got skin in the game in this. So when I speak to that, I speak to, you know, doing this work from what I know personally, from what I've seen, but also systems are supposed to work well for people. And when they don't, the people who are living that truth or lack thereof are the people we should be listening to say, I don't care what they say in City Hall, this system hasn't worked well for me in years, or I have not been able to connect with it in years. The responses should be, okay, how do we repair that? How do we fix that? How do we bring you in more? And so learning how to do that and learning how to get my life back as I do that has been both challenging and rewarding, and, you know, to some degree successful. So I'm happy to, you know, be doing the work where I grew up, because the people that I see every day and help, a lot of them I grew up with, and a lot of them watch me grow up, and they speak to what my transition has been. And that's heartwarming for me, for them to say they used to think of me as somebody that they didn't want to be next to on the neighborhood. And now they like, I'm the first person comes to mind when they've got questions about the community. That's, you know, that's pretty humbling for me.
No, yeah, hey, I absolutely get it. And Reverend Seth, you were speaking about how small and how the inner workings of Racine are, and, you know, to do something, all you got to do is know somebody. And so Carl and I were talking for the first time this afternoon, and it turns out, I mean, we have a connection much deeper than either of us ever knew, even though I've been following him as a human being for several years now and his work in the community. So I found out who he was several years ago. I've been watching what he's done in the community. Obviously, in my service work, we hear about him and we hear about these great things. And it just happens to turn out my younger sisters both know him very well, went to school with him. His cousin's a good friend. She's family to us. But yeah, it's easy. You know, we're a small town. Almost all of us know each other. One of the things I love about Racine, you know, we talk about the poor communities where we came up in, and back home in Los Angeles, our communities were absolutely racially segregated, right? No one in my community didn't speak Spanish when I first started moving around in the circles of the poor neighborhoods. And here in Racine, we have this beautiful amalgam of human beings who grew up in our poor communities, right? Shades and colors, and absolutely within the United States, poor communities are predominantly minority, and so we have a different perspective. But in Racine, it's almost a unique melting pot when it comes to our poor regions and the poverty that we see and the people who we see it with. But one of my questions that we go on, since we have your link for the hospitality center, somebody doesn't have a bank account. You know, one of the most beautiful things is when people have very little, but they choose to donate anyways, right? So if we had a cash donation, one of my viewers had asked if we had a cash donation, would we just come down to the church, come to the hospitality center? Is there a place for us to donate that cash if we have it? Our small business owners like myself, what are some of the things that we can do to assist you? So I'm 1/3 owner of a small local moving company, is there assistance that we can give you as a company or as small business owners can give you that would be more helpful than, just general cash?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, the question about small business is really interesting. I think one of the opportunities we have is just to be really creative. I mean, if there are, assets that you have, in a moving company, for example, like, a truck that we can use when we need to get a special delivery of some sort, our freezers seem to break down a lot. So you need a freezer from Home Depot to to the hospitality center, something like that. Like it might be a one-time event, but it'd be something really crucial in that moment. It could be something like, we have this monthly hair salon going, and the barbers actually at that salon are local barbers. They're in town who work at local salons. And so they figure out a way to plug in and give their particular services. I really love it when people take, the passions and the things they're involved in and figure out a way to connect it to the people that we serve. And so I'd encourage anybody who's interested in reaching out in that way to just have kind of a brainstorming session with me and say, like, what do you do and what do I do and how do those things, possibly connect? Because you'd be surprised what might happen.
Absolutely. And as a company here and there moving, our goal from the beginning, and we have some pretty amazing partners. We started, three of us, Amy May, David Garrison, and myself. We've all lived through poverty. We've all lived through trials and tribulations, and we all support serving our community. So we do charity work. We do work with the Veterans Center. Our vets are very important to us. They're a very underappreciated portion of our population. And a lot of them do end up homeless and or in poverty after serving, especially those who have served in combat. As a company, I'd like to let you know right now that feel free to call us. We do have trucks. We do have men who are strong and much stronger than myself. And you can hear my 1-year-old in the background. Yeah, again, we're doing this from home. And I do have young children here. Hold on. You bring them. So as a company, I want my children to see me not just as a father who spends time in his community, but as a business owner who understands his responsibility to his community. It's important that those of us with small businesses who are struggling and building as we go know that as we succeed, our success is tied to our community, right? We try to promote our services as an affordable service and a service that can work with any community member. Moving is an expensive job. We'll work with you within your means. But as far as our hospitality center goes, feel free to call upon us if you need assistance. We are definitely willing to walk hand in hand with you and give back to the community that supports us. Now that you guys we've talked about the hospitality center and our backgrounds, you guys have been members of our community, work in our community. You see both the good and the bad. What are some of the areas in the community that most concern you now? What are the things that most strike you as things that need to be worked on to be changed right now during this time?
So I guess, so I spoke of kind of the positive side of Racine being a small city that connects together. What I see, one of the challenges is that Racine doesn't have an abundant mindset, from my experience at least, where there's kind of a narrative it's not even spoken all the time, but it's just kind of the way people kind of approach things, is that like there's going to be scarcity. And I think especially in this COVID time, people are feeling that, and it's not that it's not real from time to time that there isn't scarcity. But I think as a community, we have a tendency to not actually recognize the fact that there is great abundance here. And I'm not just talking about financial abundance. I'm talking about like the people resources, the connections that people have, where we're located between Chicago and Milwaukee as an asset. And there are lots of strengths that this community has that I think if we really played into this mindset of being a part of an abundant community, then we could really start making some really big systemic strides. of course, Racine is in the news for all sorts of the wrong reasons when it comes to race relations and the way, minorities are treated in the city and all of that. But if we don't have this mindset that like we actually do have what we have either within ourselves or within our community to solve those problems, I think we're going to face a continued long road. But if we change that mindset to recognizing that what we have here is able to change those things, then I think we can move forward.
Definitely.
Carl,
I certainly, I certainly would agree. I struggle with a lot of the acknowledgement of what some of the current struggles are in this era. But then some of the conversations and some of the movement that is happening falls flat because the change that we're pushing for and asking for and need seems so unrealistic. It seems different. And it seems like there are some power brokers. It seems like there are some entities that are either unwilling to try because it takes a certain amount of courage, or unwilling to do so because it takes a lot of people, businesses, and otherwise out of comfort zones that have always been present. The people that you mentioned that we talked about who are struggling have always been struggling in those very same neighborhoods here in Racine. And so when we start introducing some very different and perhaps radical options, it starts seeming like the only thing that is stopping it is political will or social will, which isn't entirely accurate. Some of that's true, but a lot of it is we got to love on the people that are here and that are living this, so that they themselves can embrace the difference, in addition to systems allowing for a change to come. And as a community organizer, particularly around criminal justice with EXPO, that's what I push hard with. Racine Interfaith Coalition, we've done this work for some time now. We've been pushing around that. But what we need is a conversation and then an action every time. We need a conversation about an issue. We need action around that issue every time. And however small, 20 people, however large, 600 people, we need to get people talking to people. But that's my mindset. And it's hard to do that in the era of COVID right now, right? Bringing 600 people together in Little Racine is problematic. So what I would say, though, is that I can appreciate the ways that people have been connecting to Hospitality Center, the ways that they've been connecting to the work overall. And what we've been pushing for is just we have a banner that, has the Hospitality Center, and it's huge. What we can do is put that up on Facebook and let people, kind of, juxtapose themselves and we support Hospitality Center. Either way, I'd love for everybody to come down personally and do so. But for people to just show support to the cause in the way that they can is a big deal, because it keeps a conversation going that for the most part has been in the shadows, because I can't count on two hands how many people have come to Hospitality Center happenstance and say, I didn't even know this place existed until somebody said, oh, you want something to eat? You don't have any money? Go up the street. And now a whole nother world of Racine has been exposed to them, which has always been there. We need to be changing that.
Absolutely. So I returned to the Racine community in 2013. I first heard about the Hospitality Center, I think 3 or 4 years ago. It was rather recent compared to my return to Racine. And I didn't hear any facts, right? I heard complaints from business owners who were unhappy that Main Street had people that they felt were undesirables. And then I heard support from business owners. Several of my friends own businesses downtown. I've been pretty blessed. And, they'll deliver, drop something off, or donate some time or donate some money. They're definitely interested in the betterment of their city, and they understand that takes all of us to do. What's really nice about this medium and this spectrum is, we had talked earlier, Carl, about my mother's involvement in La Raza and the Brown Pride movement back in the 60s and the 70s. And she used to say that it sometimes felt like she could scream at the top of her lungs, but nobody heard her, right? That as a person of color in poverty, she was silent, right? Like the world didn't hear her. And one of my huge things about this program and about my service work is that my belief that our community can build itself, that we can be self-sustaining without outside interference. I'm not saying without outside assistance. Assistance is always welcome, right? When rebuilding a life, when rebuilding a neighborhood or a community or a people. Assistance is always welcome, but interference is never anything but violent, right? Interference is always a violent end to whatever it is we're trying to do when things become interfered. And I think the only way to do that is to rebuild our community and have it sustainable and have it grow and have us build what we need is to do it on our own, right? And that's what we're doing. That's what this is doing. That's what you guys are doing. Regardless of where you sleep at night, you live in our community. You live in that disparaged portion. Reverend Seth was correct. When he mentioned the fact that when they walk outside to see where we are, this is an area of poverty where you guys are centered. It's downtown where we have our small businesses, and you can walk 2 blocks and find a home that, should have been condemned 30 years ago, but still has a family of 12 living in it, struggling to make it day by day. And this is our community. And this is our place, our home. Man, I can't believe I hadn't taken the time before now to reach out to you guys and connect with you guys. For me, I don't know if you, and Reverend Seth, you and I can probably talk another time. Carl's and my background are very similar. We moved here from Los Angeles as a young teen. My childhood was far from ideal, and my young teen years and early, 20s and 30s were far from ideal. And so I find myself in a position now where I'm older, I'm a father, I have young children. I want to see them safe. I want to see them grow. I want them to see what their value to their community is. As a father, I want to model to my daughter what I believe she should look at for a man in her life if she chooses that route, and for my son to see. Personal question, and feel free to answer or not. Do you guys have families of your own? And if you do, how do they affect your work in the service industry? And how do you feel about guiding them in that industry?
Go ahead, Carl.
I'll jump in. I'll jump in here real quick. I have 2 little ones, in fact, daughter and a son, 21, and my little man soon to be 20. He swears he's taller than me. He's not. But, it might just happen, right?
Right.
My struggle with being a father who has been away for so long in transition is that I was raised by my mother and stepfather, and in the very same way that I promised myself that I would be present, unlike my father, my biological father was, I end up making the same choices that I did to be away for as long as I did. And they had to grow up without me. So in that sense, it is a hard blow to my heart that had to be the case. And what it taught me, though, was that wanting it bad enough isn't enough. You really got to put in some work. You really got to make some choices, and you really got to take some steps. But then after that, the reason why I've been able to transition well and try to, like you said, be a good example and do what I can is because I understand that the individual choices of my own only take me so far. After that, I hit all of these social walls and all of these systemic things that have nothing to do with me as an individual. And that's when we get into the long-standing institutional practices that have boxed out people in the neighborhoods that you're talking about because they're from those neighborhoods and because they're people of color. And so one of the things that I try to get out there is that individual responsibility is part of this walk in bringing people out of these communities, up and out of these communities, and bringing these communities out of the scenarios that they're in. But I love that I know that now and I can walk that and model that behavior. But my regret is that it costed me too much. And what it costed was me being able to raise my kids from, K-12. And so in this sense, I'm building relationships and reestablishing relationships with my young people because grandfatherhood is coming at some point. And, we're going to run it back and I'm going to try it again.
Reverend?
Yeah. So I have two young girls. They're early elementary school age. And I mean, it's interesting. I struggle with the fact that, my girls are white and they live in a white family and they can live like, the white life, the white privileged life. Right. And yet I know that that's is not the world. That's just not how the world is. And then B is not how the world should be. And so, so I have these, that my girls both go to schools in Milwaukee public schools. They go to a French immersion school where they're with kids from the neighborhood and they're, they are in the minority at their school, which is something to see when you got these, blonde hair, blue eyed kids going to school with, a bunch of people of color. But it's an incredible thing. And I think now, I don't so much include them in my work, during the week necessarily. But what I do is I want them to experience what it's like to actually be with people. And I think that to me is the most important thing. I mean, like, I, as a white person, can fall into the trap of doing things for other people really, really easily. Right. And so, and it's the worst thing, it creates this inequity that we've been living with for generations that has been the source of some horrible things. And so what I want my kids to know is that, we are with people, and there are people that, might look different than us. There are people that might have less money than us, less things than us, or more things than us and more money than us. But the point of being here and being a part of this human story is being connected with one another and be with one another. So from time to time, like I'll take my kids to a soup kitchen in Milwaukee just to have dinner, not to serve, actually just to be there, and to be with other people and experience what that's like to be in that kind of atmosphere. And then we do some of the, the stuff that's popular right now, reading some anti-racism books for kids, talking to them about that. And, trying to be very positive in our speech about how other people look and, the hair they have and the way they present themselves, all of these things, or the hair they don't have. Yeah.
Right.
And so I realize that kind of the burden is on me to be able to teach them to be different than many of the people that, they're coming after. So.
Yeah, absolutely. It's wonderful. So, my children are 26, 25, 6, 6-year-old stepdaughter and 1, and my grandchildren are 7, 4, and 2. So I left my community when my daughter was 1 and my son was 2 months old, and I returned when they were 18 and 19. And I have a unique, I have the blessing of having a unique perspective on fatherhood. My older 2 children and I are very close now. It wasn't always that way. I was gone for the entirety of their childhood. And now that I'm a part of their lives, they've blessed me with forgiveness. And we've become close. And it's fun because my older son is an amazing man. We don't agree on some stuff, but he's this man that I can respect as a human being. And he gave me a hug after coming to visit one time and gave me the greatest compliment I could have asked for, which is he loves the dad I am to his sister and brother. And for me, that was just like, God giving me a kiss on the forehead, right? My little boy who I had left could see the goodness in me and could see the man that I was becoming and was proud of that, right? I don't think I could ever go without it. Carl, good luck on grandfatherhood. It's not easy. It's fun. It's fun.
I'm beginning to learn that. Yes.
So my daughter, when my
around, no doubt.
Yeah, when my granddaughter was 3, I would babysit when she would need it occasionally. And one time, And she's gonna now she's gonna know, and so I'm gonna be in trouble. But I remember she would call and be like, "Dad, I need you to babysit for an hour," and I'd be like, "All right, baby," and she would drop her off and come back like 4 hours later, call me and be like, "All right, I'm on my way." You know what an hour is to us, and so around the corner, I'm around the corner. All right, I'll see
you.
Block. I'll see you tomorrow morning, bro.
Right.
So she called me and she's like, "I'm on my way 15 minutes out." I knew it was going to be about an hour. I gave this little girl 2 chocolate bars, a soda pop, some Jell-O, everything I could. And my daughter called me about 4 hours later and she's like, "Dad, I don't understand what's going on. Anaya's tired, but she's running around the house and I just don't know what's up." And I was like, "Oh, she was a perfect angel for me, baby." That'll be the highlights of your life, Carl. Otherwise, holding them when they call you Papa or Papa or Grandpa, whatever they call you, it's going to melt you like the first time your babies looked at you and said, "Dad." It's an amazing.
Right on.
Right on. Little ones to raise at the same time. I'm experiencing all the things I missed when I had left my family. And I don't think there's anything more gratifying than when my son crawls up on my lap and puts his head on my chest, or my 6-year-old daughter will come over and hug me and scream when I walk through that door because I'm just coming home from work. Those feelings for me were feelings I never understood, and I'm grateful that I've been given that blessing.
Right.
I have a friend. She was wondering if she could learn a little bit more about your work with EXPO and what it is. And then Jethro Owen said, "All the respect and thank you for the charity work we're doing here in Racine and the service work we're doing here in Racine and how we're building our own community ourselves." I've known him for a long time. He's an amazing person himself. So, yeah, could you expand a little bit on EXPO and what it is you do?
Sure, absolutely. Well, 2 things really is that EXPO is an advocacy group. And EXPO stands for Ex-Incarcerated People Organizing. And I'm the organizer for the local chapter here, the Racine Kenosha chapter of EXPO. And what it is in a nutshell is part peer support, part civic engagement. I also am the current board vice president of Racine Vocational Ministries, which is the reentry program here. And I say that because one is about advocacy work and the other is about service providing. And one of the things that people who are in transition need is services, but they also need a way out. They need a way up, but they need a way out. And part of what we do in advocacy work is we bring people into community with people who are like themselves and people who are supportive of that work. Physically, we do a lot of that. At least we used to until COVID. But we also train people around what it takes to be civically engaged. We train people around activism. We train them around what it means to regain your life, because being clean, sober, and staying out of trouble doesn't equate to getting your life back. It's actually just the start of getting your life back. Because if you did all those things, you still wouldn't get your life back, and you still wouldn't be civically engaged in the way that you think. It still comes out of a certain kind of knowledge, and it still comes out of being in community. But that kind of base of people who are what they call directly impacted or system impacted is the kind of thing that needs to be spoken of at whether it's City Hall, whether it's at the county when they're making county decisions about budgets, or it's at the State House when we're talking about changing laws and changing policies, so a person can really get their life back when they quote unquote paid their dues, as they say in society. If they pay if one like myself or like yourself has paid their dues, but we still have a thing called collateral consequences that exist, and I'm still struggling 5 years later, 10 years later, 20 years later to get my life back, even though I've shown that I've transitioned, I'm no longer the person I used to be. How do we change that from a first person perspective? We do so by building a collective. And that collective for me has been EXPO. And the difference in EXPO versus a lot of the other programs that I've seen is that you have these different models that help you to sustain yourself, to get your life back, but then they're anonymous. So I can't talk about how Monty helped me get my life back because we did it in an anonymous way. I don't get to talk about the system that Monty used to teach me about my city and how it works, because I'm not supposed to speak about Monty and his background. You know what I mean? That kind of thing. And so that full disclosure layer is something that exists with EXPO for me that didn't exist in other groups. And so that's why I joined. And that's how I became an organizer of EXPO.
Awesome. Amazing. Why is it important? So here's a sentiment that I hear often. Why is it important to help men and women coming home from incarceration? And what benefit do they have to our community if we know they've already been criminals or are criminals or are coming home after serving their time? What benefit can they be to us as a community if they've already engaged in felonious activity and causing problems in our community? Why is it important that we help them?
I mean, the biggest thing is that prisons are a social experiment. They're a rather expensive social experiment that we're all investing in. We're talking about an annual budget of about $1.3 billion. And we're talking about 90+% of the people who go to prison or some kind of incarceration are coming home. Then we're talking about an investment that needs an outcome, a righteous outcome, an investment that needs some sort of result. And when we talk about how low the effectiveness rates of whether it's putting people in the building or getting them programming in these buildings, how well that's not working, we got a real problem. When we talk about transition, we're talking about how a person went through an entire ritual of being removed of their rights, of their civil rights, some human rights, unfortunately, because these are some real terrible places in terms of how they beat up on your spirit and beat up on your soul. When we're talking about bringing a person back into community, the community does not participate in bringing that person back, particularly bringing them back well. And that's problematic because the whole community played a part in relieving that person of their ability to be civically engaged. Where is that equal process? And where is it showing that this is a good investment? What we've shown through the numbers and what we've shown through just overall experiences is that there are better ways to be utilizing these taxpayer dollars and this taxpayer money than in the way that we currently have. The problem with that, in my opinion, is that the way that we're talking about, which has a restorative justice component to it, has a restorative justice lens to it, that sort of approach doesn't bode well for votes. You don't get elected on talking about transforming the system in a restorative justice kind of way. You also don't get, brownie points for what would Jim at RVM call it? Hug a thug. That's the phrase, right? As a politician, you don't get any points for hugging thugs. But when we step back just a few layers and talk about how we criminalize poverty and we cut programs that would have prevented people from going down a certain path, and then we heavily police those communities that have very few or little resources, then we know where this problem started. We can see that, and it takes some real courage and some real political will to invest in social programs on the front end that would help people. And because investing on the front end changes trajectories. You know what I mean? When you change my trajectory, you change the options and the list of options that I have on being able to build a good life for myself. When you let a young person languish in some of the type of scenarios that, you and I both know, it's not surprising that this young person comes out battle hardened on this side of adulthood. And so there's a saying about, building up strong kids to become adults than trying to repair broken men. And when I saw that some years back, it struck me because we have the ability to prevent a lot of these social ills. I always frame it as social injustice equals criminal justice. And so when we're talking about school to prison pipelines, when we're talking about breaking pipelines, we're talking about front end work, helping young people and helping parents with young people in those scenarios. When we're talking about peers like me and you, we can't be on the each one teach one anymore. We got to be on each one teach 10, each one teach 20. And we have to take some real courageous steps to call systemically oppressive methods, call them what they are. And unfortunately, I sit in a lot of different meetings these days, a lot of Zooms. I do a lot of work, and I see a lot of different systemic practices repeat themselves. And when I try to unpack them with the professionalism that I've been trained to utilize, they don't move all that much. When we make some noise about it and we bring people who are living the opposite truth from what's being presented at the table, then they start listening. So stories are important, and people who have those stories are important. This is why we invite people in the work who are living that truth. And we invite them into the center of the work because those closest to the problem are closest to the solution. Or as Nick said, those closest to the pain should be closest to the power.
Yeah, absolutely. It's insane since over the last 30 years, the Wisconsin prison population exploded. And, black males make up the majority of that population. And it's funny because, Wisconsin, a lot of people don't know, most of us live in the cities. So, we have a high population in the cities. So we see a mixture, but Racine's racial diversity is very small. It's under 10% minority. And yet, 70 or 80% of us make up the entirety of the prison population, which is to say that 10% of our community, less than 10% of our community commit 80+% of our crime. That disparity doesn't make any sense.
No.
I agree with you on that.
No.
Yeah, but no, absolutely. One of the things I look at when people talk about lock them up and throw away the key is you said it right. So you put the returning home rate at like 90%. It's actually a lot higher. It's closer to 95%. Only about
90 plus. That's one of the statistics that's arguable from a lot of different people. So I just say 90 plus. I know it's 95, 96%, no doubt about it.
Only about 4 or 5% of people die in prison.
High.
The rest come home. And this is what I tell people. And I have a lot of people. I work with a lot of people who are in the higher tax bracket. They're much more affluent. And they say, well, why would you spend so much time with people coming home from incarceration or in that lifestyle? What do you think you can accomplish? And I said, and I always tell them the same thing. Let's take all of the goody hug a thug out of it, right? We're going to take the hug. And I agree. Sometimes a thug just needs a hug, right?
Sometimes, right? Sometimes. Hey, you didn't get a hug as a kid. Now you need one badly as an adult.
Right. And a lot of us didn't get those fatherly hugs and that love, right? So let's take all the lovey-dovey stuff out and let's look at this as a practical, pragmatic situation. If 95% of them come home and every time they go away, a victim's created, let's not take into account the fact that their family's victimized, they're victimized as well. Incarceration is a violent act. So let's take that out of it. Let's just think about the person that's directly a victim of the crime that they commit. So every time one of the 95% that come home go back, there's a victim created. And if we have a chance to stop them from going back, that means we have a chance to stop that victim from being created. Now we've just possibly saved a life or saved a turning point in a life that could have spiraled that life out of it. It just makes sense to me, right, to help stop someone from going back to incarceration, regardless of my background, regardless of the hug-a-thug feeling or the personal feeling. Now I've just made my daughter safer, my son safer, my neighbor safer, my mother safer, my sister safer, my grandma safer, you safer, Reverend Seth safer. If I can keep a victim from being created,
right,
I've just saved a life, right?
Sure. But I mean that's the straightforward, cut it to the quick answer. But the problem with that is that the systems that can do that and produce those kind of results, those systems only produce those results for a limited few. We talk whether it's the criminal justice system overall, whether it's the county jail, whether it's workforce development, you name it. All these different systems produce certain outcomes, and in those numbers, you will always see racial disparities, and that's the truth of it. Those racial disparities are current results that we have to deal with. Flashback a few decades, 40 years ago, 80 years ago, these systems were built directly with racism in mind, and they called it what it was. They were built with segregationist mindsets, and they were built with racism in mind. And so although the systems, are arguably no longer controlled by people who are racist, the system still seems to continue to produce the same kind of result that it was built for, racial disparities. And so when we talk about that, that's the systemic oppression that we're talking about. Those are the kinds of things that when I talk to people who control systems, and they challenge me, are you saying I'm racist? Not at all. As an individual, I have no idea whether you're racist or not, but I know that the system that we're talking about and you're coming out of is still producing a certain kind of result. Now, that result has been heaped on the shoulders of individuals, and it's said that, their behavior is what's doing this. And so their behavior is the only thing that can pull them out of that. When we can also show that the way that these different systems fit together with their interlocking rules has a way of boxing a person out if they're from a certain income bracket, if their parents had a certain background, if their education level isn't this or that. All these things amount to this person having a slow or terrible trajectory. And that's not even including anybody with a criminal history or criminal background. You know what I mean? Those kinds of things about that kind of racial and social reconciliation is just not something that we've talked about openly and honestly until very recently. And now that we certainly are not looking to lose that momentum, but to keep that going. And so one of the reasons why I chose to come and live my life out loud as an ex-knucklehead was because I didn't see any other way of me being able to get my life back after doing almost 20 years. I've seen people like us, people like myself, come home and be silent about what they've been through. But in that, I would have also had to be silent about what I learned, which means I would have had to start with a clean slate and my resume would have absolutely nothing on it because I've been gone since forever. And I've seen people get a shot at life despite them mentioning what they've been through. But what I've seen in those kind of secret social contracts have been, we're going to give you this job despite your background, but I'm going to want you to not talk about it. I want you to not highlight that. And so there are a lot of success stories that exist whose backgrounds look like ours that we can't build off of because they're deadly afraid to talk about it because society still has them in a box to say, if you talk about this, you'll be ousted. If you talk about this, you become less somehow. And having poor choices in your background and having gone through something in your background is still something that is viewed as less. And unfortunately, I see there's a question about whether or not I've been able to speak in prison. The answer to that is mostly no. And that is because I'm still a person who's walking this walk with the criminal justice system. And because of that, I'm not viewed as somebody who is trustworthy to come into prisons and speak. I'm still viewed as too high of a risk to get that kind of clearance. And because each and every prison, you have to get its own clearance, I would have to jump the hoop through the 40 plus prisons throughout the state. And so I've been unable to go in prisons for the most part. But that's another one of those systemic things that exist because I've also been acknowledged, as you said, as a community asset. I've also been acknowledged by most people that I know to say, oh, yeah, dude's far, far away from any sort of thing that includes a criminal life. But I can't act on that and I can't operate from that because I'm still system impacted. And so I don't get a full and rich life. And so because of that, I make noise. Because of that, I organize people who are still living that truth. And I train them around what it takes to both get their lives back, that their story has value and power to it, and how to tell that story in a way to gain and produce results.
Seth, and the work that you've been doing, obviously you work with quite a few men and women who have been incarcerated. Our homeless population is riddled with men and women coming home from incarceration who weren't able to make it afterwards due to the inability to find jobs regardless of what their crimes were. How has that impacted you working with the men and women who are coming home from incarceration? What's been your experience with them?
For me, it's been, a real learning experience. I mean, I have folks in my own family who have been incarcerated, but not close enough in geography to really have been impacted on me. Knowing that, but I do know that I have a cousin who's incarcerated and then an uncle, and both of them were able to come out and kind of regain their lives through drug court, and then one through, kind of going through the parole system and then getting a job as a truck driver. And what what I've learned in that, and the difference between a lot of the people that we see, is exactly what Carl's talking about, where, it's not just the fact that you have this criminal record, you also have your race and where you grew up, and, like the fact that you didn't graduate from high school, possibly, all of these things are the systemic issues that still, someone like me isn't necessarily going to face coming out of incarceration. And it's not to say that, anybody with, as Carl was saying, F on the report cards, anybody who has a felon designation is going to have trouble. I mean, that is certainly true. But there's these layers that go on when you're also fighting these other systemic injustices. And hearing people's stories, where they would really like to work, they would like to gain access to employment. And they're, fighting, how much do they talk about their own background? Carl was fortunate because he hit somebody who was a newbie and just told it how it was. And I just said, all right, that's cool. But I know that that's not how it is when people are going into the corporate world, and the corporate world has different standards, and so I certainly have learned a ton from Carl. It's a real honor to work with him and also to be able to support the work he does outside the hospitality center as well.
Yeah, absolutely. He's been an inspiration to me. There's a handful of people who over the last decade, their stories, whether directly or indirectly, have inspired me to grow and inspired me to reach for more instead of just being content with what I had. What more can I do? What more can I give? What more can I say? How can I make things better? And so one of my very, very closest friends, Sammy Rangel, and I were talking about it. And, we talk about incarceration as paying our dues. And I definitely agree. But we also believe that we have a tax on that due, right? If you go to the store and buy a toy for $1, it costs you $1.05. You got taxes, right? So I paid my $1, and now I'm paying my taxes, right? And my taxes aren't owed to the state. My taxes aren't owed to the justice system. My taxes aren't owed to the government. My taxes are owed to my community. I owe the men and women of my community that I helped destroy my time, my blood, and my hard work into helping rebuild. And that's something that people like Carl embody, right? They came back and they call themselves former knuckleheads. They call themselves, whatever it is that we label ourselves as. They know that what they owe now is a better future for those who follow them, right? The children who come behind us, the boys that we influence. Unfortunately, for those of us in our community, most of us grew up without fathers present. We didn't have anyone to look to guide us in fatherhood except for Tony Montana and Nino Brown, right? These are the men we idoled as children. I know I did. That was going to be my life. I would be the strongest, the baddest, the richest, and I'd do it any way I had to because that's what men do, right? And now here we are fathering our community, right? We have to father our community because the men that followed us, like we followed them, are gone for them now. And it's a wonderful thing when men like you, Reverend, come in from outside that community and say, this is my responsibility as well. I have a responsibility to love and to man and to the world. And so let me pitch in and pay some taxes as well. But you're right in the sense of falling into the trap of doing things for others. When you do something for someone, they learn nothing. When you do something for someone, they become dependent. When you walk with them, stand by their side and teach them, you give them the gift of independence. You give them the gift of self-worth and self-reliability, at least in my belief system, man. I'd love to spend another 4 or 5 hours with you guys. I have 1,000 more questions about the hospitality center, about our future, how we can grow our city and our community. And we are called our community, our Racine. our community, our responsibility, Racine, Ocor, Racine. But our community isn't exclusive. Our community is inclusive of every poor person in this country who's struggling to get a fair shake or to build a better future for their children. I hope in 5 years there's in our community, every city, our community Kenosha, our community Milwaukee, everyone individually working to build this future that we can build together. And it's funny because we're sitting here with brown, black, and white on one screen discussing the future of our poverty-stricken areas in our community. And this is how it's supposed to be, right? This is the true representation of what should be, right? All of us here as one, 3 different backgrounds, 3 different financial, situations, 3 different historical backgrounds, and we're sitting here together talking about what we can do to build together. I think that is the most wonderful and beautiful thing that could be. Thank you guys for your work here in our community at the Hospitality Center. Carl, you got my number. Feel free to pass it on to Reverend Seth. I would definitely like my partners and I to come down and discuss what we can do for you. I apologize about the chronic cough. I do have a rare form of COPD. I don't have COVID yet. At some point, I guess everybody will. But I don't have it yet. I just have a chronic cough from my COPD, which is not communicable, so I won't pass it on. But I would love to spend more time with you guys. I'd like to say thank you. This show was a great. We have other people prepping to comment. Terry said, to your response, Carl, about not being able to go into institutions and speak and help with the other men, her response was, "That's dumb."
Especially when they tell the community that it's people like us that would do a great job at doing that work with connecting with them.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's funny. Men and women don't take easily to others in our situations and our histories. It's hard to trust when every time you've trusted before, it's been broken. You and I talked about the things that I did to reach out as a child, to have a system fail me and never even care enough to come see. It's hard to trust those around us. But here's what I got to say to Terry. Yes, I agree with you, sweetheart. That is dumb. I've known you forever. Change it. Every single one of us sitting here watching our TV or watching YouTube or watching our Facebook feed, the power is in your hand. We have the power. We have the ability to change the system if we act. They say, less than 15% of minorities vote. There's the ability there. And although the votes don't always come out in our favor, we do have the ability to work on that and to make that stronger. And as we see middle-class America is listening, we're becoming homogenous. We're starting to teach others through our peaceful means of how to speak out. We can change anything we want as long as we change it together, right? And we work for it as a collective. The hive has to be heard. So I'd like to say thank you guys both. Dude, Carl hit me. We'll have to have lunch sometime, Reverend, you as well. We're definitely interested in coming in and doing some work with the Hospitality Center. I think that could be a thing. So.
Sorting clothes.
Yeah. Now listen, you said clothing, right? Because my other half, I seen her head kind of turn when she said to take clothing donations. I'm going to admit it to her right now. As a man who grew up with very little as a child, I have, I think, 130 pairs of blue jeans.
Right.
I think I wear, because I wear shorts anytime possible, right? All the way up until it's -0, I'll wear shorts. And then as soon as it hits 35 degrees, I'll put shorts back on. So I only wear pants for like a month out of the year, right? I still have like 130 pairs of pants, right? I have 3 times the amount of clothes that she has. And then let's not start on shoes. Unfortunately for you guys, hey, Reverend, if you have somebody who needs a size 18 and a half, send them to me. I have definitely plenty of extras. But as far as clothing goes, she got really excited. I seen her duck off to the room. I'm pretty sure she just emptied out half of my closet into folded bags. So we'll definitely bring some of that. When it comes to clothing, is there a certain type of clothing that would work best? Are we looking for work clothes and or interview clothes, suits? What would be best suited for our donations for you guys before we leave?
Sure. So one of the things that I learned here is that when our folks say they need work clothes, that means they need like blue jeans and good sturdy shoes and, t-shirts, because they're working, they're out working on, the line, or they're working in construction. And so when people like me say work clothes, they mean like a button down shirt. We need the work clothes where like you're going to get your hands dirty. That's what we need. And sturdy shoes. I mean, that is, yes, you're right. Not many people are going to wear your size shoe, but we need some sturdy shoes that have not been worn to death, that people can wear out on a work site, wear walking around town. That's what we need.
All right. Sounds great. Well, as we were speaking, I was just presented with a fresh bowl of homemade pot roast. And as you can see, I'm a rather large man. So we'll end this today by saying thank you, Carl. Thank you, Reverend. I can't tell you how much we appreciate your work in the community. And I'm very excited to see what our viewers and myself and our community can do to help you guys. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening. And I'll talk to you both soon.
All right. Thanks, Monty.
Thanks, Monty.